I swapped the genders on a male feminist post, and this is what happened. My name's Jared Mello, the wizard of radical self-respect and the shepherd of black sheep. Before I get into today's video, please remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you liked the video, please remember to like it and comment below your thoughts on my social experiment. And the social experiment was, I took Chris Perry's posts on Facebook. Chris Perry is a male feminist. He panders to women. He has over 3 million followers. I took 3 of his posts and I swapped the genders to see what would happen. The 3 posts I switched were, the first one was, imagine losing a woman that doesn't go out, doesn't sleep around, knows her worth, communicates clearly, knows what she wants, and only wants you. Embarrassing. And I switched that to imagine losing a man that had those things. The next one was, a woman who has created her own peace is a woman that is not for immature men. One wrong move and you're done. I switched that to dating a man who has created his own peace isn't for immature women. The third one I switched was, disrespecting your woman by talking to other women is embarrassing to her. They're looking at her like if she only knew what he was doing. Never embarrass your woman like that. If you're going to do that, just be single. And I switched that to being for men instead. And what were the results? Well, some of them were what you would expect. Some men, once I switched the genders, they were all for it. Some men, they went too far and they generalized against all women. And then other men, to their credit, they actually gave me a little pushback. And they said, for example, with that second one wrong move and you're done. They would say, now a man who has his crap together, they'll be able to deal with a little bit more. Not that they're going to deal with disrespect, but they're going to be able to handle more and have more capacity. And then what women said, some women, to their credit, still agreed with the posts, even though I switched the genders. Other women were furious with me and said, your page is pretty toxic now and patriarchal. I might have to unfollow you. Or they said, you are woman bashing. Or they said, I need therapy. Or what they called me an incel, that I was giving nice guy rage bait. And they had all sorts of terrible things to say. And the things I would wonder about those things were, I wonder what would happen if a man said those things on Chris Perry's page. That's what I would wonder. And then the other women, they actually gave me some reasonable pushback on it. They would be the things that I would say as a man to Chris Perry's posts. And I found myself agreeing with the women that gave some very reasonable pushback. And they said, yeah, it's not going to be black and white just because a woman or a man has those qualities doesn't mean you're compatible, doesn't mean it's a good fit with that person. And I would say, yeah, that totally makes sense to me. But with Chris Perry's page, it's an example of gaslighting. Gaslighting is when everyone agrees with one another, and when everyone agrees, people become more and more extreme in their thinking because there is no pushback. But I also would have been super curious to find out the women who gave reasonable pushback on my posts, if I would have said those same things on Chris Perry's posts, what would have happened? I would probably have been called insecure, an incel, or they would have laughed, reacted my comments, etc. But what do you learn? What do you make out of this experiment? One thing I would say is, if all it takes is to switch the genders and all of a sudden the post seems really cringe, that's probably a red flag. Another lesson to take from this is, if you were a man and you found yourself agreeing with the post when it was in men's favor, how would you feel if it was in favor of women and the genders were reversed? And if you were a woman who was upset because it was about a man, how would you feel if the genders were reversed? If that would completely change how you see it, that would be a little bit hypocritical, and that's a bit of a double standard. And that is one of the big things I wanted to point out in this experiment is all it takes is to switch the genders and then certain people are going to see the same exact post because all of the words were exactly the same besides the genders. That was the experiment. And I think the people who are in control, the elites, the powers to be, they want to divide people between gender, between race, etc. They do not want people to be united, especially amongst income class. But I'll always say this. People of the same income class or around, middle class and below, people of any race, or men and women both, they're going to have way more in common with one another, and any sexuality too for that matter, than people who are multimillionaires or billionaires. Multimillionaires to billionaires of any race, man or woman, are going to have way more in common with each other than the people that are of middle income to lower income. And I think this is what the powers to be are afraid of. They don't want people to unite amongst similar income classes. Gender stuff, race stuff, and sexuality stuff, it's a huge divider. And it absolutely works, unfortunately. And when I see people like Chris Perry and this other guy, Robbie Harvey, I think his name is, and all they do is pander to women, they are basically manipulating them and exploiting them for financial gain. That's what it is. But people don't notice because they agree with the content. So that it doesn't feel like they're being exploited or manipulated, even though they absolutely are. And I think that guy, Robbie Harvey, he's even worse than Chris Perry. Chris Perry's cringe. Robbie Harvey, he's out of control, if you ask me. But that's the other point here, too. If you were to switch these genders and all of a sudden a post seems cringe, that's probably a red flag. It means that that post is probably antagonistic, or at the very least, you're going to be hypocritical, or it's a double standard to be annoyed if the genders were reversed. But sometimes people would say, well, women have it worse off, so they're allowed to have a double standard. I don't really subscribe to that thinking. I know it's pretty prevalent, especially on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, etc., but I think anyone could be a victim of something. I choose not to live in that way, though. And I know they'll say to me, Jared, well, you're a white man, easy for you to say. But hey, I've had a lot of things going against me too. Addictions, being on the spectrum, mental health issues. So I get it. I'm not saying I understand women's issues completely or black people's issues completely. I just know I've had my own struggles. And that's the thing. We've all had our own struggles. They're going to look differently. And something can be true. We can be a victim, but how do we choose to live? Do we choose to live as a victim, or do we try to live in a way that helps us to become the best version of ourselves? I know which version I choose. And I think most of the people that follow me, they would choose that way too, and that's why they're here. I choose to practice radical self-respect. It doesn't mean I ignore the bad things that have happened. It doesn't mean I don't acknowledge them. I just try to do the best I can anyway. But remember that the next time you see these gendered posts, take a step back and say, okay, how would I feel if the genders were reversed? Would I still be upset? Or would I agree? Because if there's a difference there, it's just something to pay attention to. And I think understanding men have problems and women have problems. They're going to look a little bit differently, but they both have problems. And I think that's something to understand here, that it shouldn't be men versus women. Men are supposed to be uniting with women. We're supposed to be complementing one another. And for whatever reason, people, the powers to be, it doesn't seem like they want that. They want us divided, and the people are all too willing to oblige, and we divide ourselves. I'm just suggesting that we push back against that a little bit, because it's an unnecessary way for us to divide ourselves. Our quality of life is much better than it's been, and I know some people will say, well, you're invalidating, you're sweeping problems under the rug, but no, we still have a lot of things to be grateful for. That is also true. We have a pretty high standard of living today. So let's not completely focus on the things that we don't have and the things that aren't going well. Yes, are there things not going well? Absolutely. But what are we going to choose to do about it? Are we going to choose to take productive action? or are we going to choose to be a victim and complain? Again, I know which ones I choose. But this was the experiment here, the switching of the genders on Chris Perry's posts. And it was wild, the answers. The results were kind of as I expected. A lot of women got annoyed. Some women agreed. And some women, they were calling me all sorts of names, an incel, rage bait, nice guy, all sorts of things. And some men agreed. Some men went too far. And some men pushed back. It was a pretty interesting experiment. Hopefully you learned something from it if you followed it through on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube here. And I think it's a good way to take a step back and say, okay, this is what happens when you switch the genders. Maybe I will be a little less likely to fire at will when I see a gendered post like this in the future. Take a step back, respond rather than react, and understand it's not supposed to be men versus women. We are supposed to complement one another. I think that's something to keep in mind too. But again, if you got this far, please remember to subscribe to the channel. If you liked the video, please remember to like it. Comment below your thoughts on my social experiment, and share this video with someone else that you think might benefit from learning about this social experiment. Maybe there's someone that has these double standards or can be hypocritical. It'd be interesting to see what they would say about it. But with that, thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.